All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to be unpacking a pretty serious document that's been submitted to the international community. It's a dossier making some heavy allegations against one of South Africa's most prominent and, let's be honest, controversial political figures, Julius Malema. And this isn't just a report, it's a direct call for the world to step in.
So what is this document really? Well, it was put together by two South African civil society organizations, AfriForum and SAI. And they've basically gone over the heads of the domestic authorities to make their case on the world stage, asking for some very real penalties. So let's walk through exactly what they're arguing.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to follow the dossier's own logic. First up, who's behind this and why are they doing it? Then we'll dig into the three big claims they make: accusations of violent rhetoric, massive corruption, and what they call his anti-Western stance. And we'll wrap up with what they actually want the world to do about it.
All right, first things first. Why go international with this? Well, according to the authors, AfriForum and SAI, this is pretty much their last resort. Their whole argument hinges on one big idea, that the system inside South Africa has failed to hold Malema accountable. They're essentially saying he's become, and this is their word, untouchable at home. Okay, so let's get into the first big piece of their argument. It's all about violent rhetoric. The dossier lays out what it claims is a consistent pattern of hate speech and, inciting violence. This is really the cornerstone of their human rights case against him.
And this is probably the most famous or infamous chant associated with Malema. But here's where it gets really complicated. The dossier points out that South Africa's highest court actually looked at this exact chant and ruled that it was not hate speech. A decision that the dossier, as you can imagine, calls very controversial.
And check out this one from 2016. It's a perfect example of the kind of statement they're flagging. They also mention a follow-up where he supposedly said he couldn't guarantee the future. And again, the dossier makes a point of saying that a domestic body, in this case the South African Human Rights Commission, looked into it and found it didn't legally cross the line into hate speech. You see the pattern they're building here?
And it doesn't stop there. The dossier lists a whole bunch of other direct quotes to back up its case. Some are more, let's say, ideological, quoting revolutionaries about hate and killing. And then you have stuff that's way more personal, like an alleged threat made to another politician. The point they're trying to make is, look, this is a clear and consistent pattern.
All right, so moving on from words to money. The dossier's second big claim is all about major corruption. And they don't just make vague accusations. They zero in on two very specific, very high-profile cases that they tie directly to Malema. So the two scandals they put under the microscope are the On Point engineering affair and the collapse of VBS Mutual Bank. On Point is about alleged fraud with government contracts. VBS, on the other hand, is about the failure of a bank, where tons of money from regular people and towns just vanished. So let's break down the On Point allegation. The dossier claims that a company connected to Malema's family trust got a government contract it shouldn't have, basically through misrepresentation. But here's the kicker, and this is the dossier's main point. Charges were filed, but the case got struck from the court roll back in 2015, and nothing has happened since. It's just been sitting there.
Now for the second case, the VBS Mutual Bank scandal. The number the dossier throws out there is huge, 2 billion rand. That's the amount they say was defrauded from citizens and taxpayers.
So how do they connect this to Malema and his political party, the EFF? Well, the dossier says a formal complaint was lodged that claims the party itself was used as a kind of enterprise to launder money from the VBS collapse. They literally call it a vehicle for the private looting of funds.
Okay, so we've covered rhetoric and corruption. The third and final pillar of their argument zooms out, way out, to international politics. Here, the goal is to portray Malema as someone who is fundamentally, deeply anti-West. And the dossier basically draws a line in the sand. On one side, you have harsh words for the USA, NATO, and the EU, calling them imperialists and white supremacists. And on the other side, a lot of support for countries like Russia and China and groups like Hamas. The dossier frames this as him picking a side in a global fight against the West.
And this quote from October 2023 is one they really emphasize. It's presented as a straight-up promise to arm Hamas, a group that many Western governments consider a terrorist organization. You can see why they would include this. It's central to their argument that this is now an international issue.
So, okay, they've laid out their case: violent rhetoric, major corruption, and anti-Western stance. So what? What do they actually want to happen? This brings us to the whole point of the dossier. their proposed solution, which is a direct appeal to the rest of the world.
And they have a very specific tool in mind, the Global Magnitsky Act. Now, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a U.S. law that gives the American government the power to sanction individuals anywhere on the planet if they're found to be involved in serious corruption or major human rights abuses. It's a pretty big deal.
So what does that mean in practice? Well, their wish list is pretty clear. First, they want personal sanctions against Malema himself. We're talking things like freezing his assets and banning him from traveling. Second, they want world leaders to publicly call him out. And third, they want other countries to put diplomatic heat on the South African government to do something about it.
And really, this takes us right back to where we started. The entire foundation of this whole document, all 70-plus pages of it, boils down to one single claim, that South Africa's own legal and political systems have failed. And because of that, they argue that turning to the international community isn't just one choice among many. In their eyes, it's the only choice left.
And all of this really leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? The very existence of this dossier, regardless of the claims inside it, forces a really tricky debate to the forefront. When do a country's internal politics stop being just internal? At what point does what happens inside one nation's borders become a legitimate problem for the rest of the world to deal with? There's definitely no easy answer to that one.